Sometimes we compare historic biblical Christianity with other religions as a way of underscoring what the Bible teaches. So let's look at what Mormonism teaches about the basic concept of God. Remember that just because Mormons don't agree with us, there's no reason to mock or ridicule them. Their beliefs make sense to them. Also, you need to understand that not all Mormons believe exactly the same on all the details. And with that in mind, let's try to understand what Mormonism says about God so we can compare our own beliefs. First of all, Mormons teach that God the Father has not always been God. There was a time in the past when he was actually a human being just like us. Joseph Smith said, "God himself was once as we are now. It is the first principle of the gospel to know for certainty the character of God, that he was once a man like us, yea, that God himself, the Father of us all, dwelt on an earth, the same as Jesus Christ himself did." But a later prophet of Mormonism summarized that doctrine in a famous saying, "As man now is, God once was." But by contrast, the Bible teaches that God has always been God. Psalm 90 verse 2 says, "Before the mountains were born, before you gave birth to the earth and the world, from beginning to end, you are God." So long before anything else existed, God was still God. One translation says, "From everlasting to everlasting, you are God." Along similar lines, the Mormons teach that God the Father is now an exalted man. See, God did not remain in his mortal human state, but he progressed to become God. That's what the word exalted means to Mormons. Here's more from that same Joseph Smith quote. He said, "God himself was once as we are now, and is an exalted man, and sits enthroned in yonder heavens." But the Bible teaches that God is not a man, nor ever was a man. In Numbers 23, it says, "God is not a man, so he does not lie. He is not human, so he does not change his mind." It's saying here God doesn't have the failings that human beings have. And the reason is not just because he's a highly evolved or exalted human, but because he isn't human at all. And then third, the Mormons teach that God the Father has a physical body of flesh and bone. A training manual called Gospel Principles, found on the Mormon Church website, says, "His eternal spirit is housed in a tangible body of flesh and bones." And it makes sense that they would think that, because if God is and was a man, then he would have a human body, 2 arms, 2 legs, internal organs, and so forth. But the Bible teaches that God does not have a body, but it's a spirit. In John 4, verse 24, it simply says, "For God is spirit." It doesn't say God has a spirit, but God is a spirit, and by definition that means that he's not embodied. And similarly, in Jeremiah chapter 23, God says, "Am I not everywhere in all the heavens and earth?" See, that would not be possible if God had a physical human body, even if it was an exalted one. And in the end, Mormons teach that human beings can actually become like God is now. So the second half of that saying, "As man now is, God once was," it goes on to say, "As God now is, man may be." And so if God was once a man who became God, it makes sense to them that others can do the same thing. But the Bible teaches that God is a far different kind of being from us, that we could never become deities like him. And the prophet Isaiah condemns in the strongest terms those who fail to make that distinction. And in Isaiah 14, he quotes a king who thought he could become like God. The king said, "I will climb to the highest heavens and be like the Most High." But Isaiah says, instead, "You'll be brought down to the place of the dead, down to its lowest depths." So human beings can't become gods, and that's an insult to the uniqueness and glory of the one being who really is God. Now, hopefully that overview helps you understand more fully what the Bible says about the nature of God. So why don't you take a few minutes and talk about that?